The smell of burnt coffee and floor polish hit me the second we stepped out of the courthouse elevator. My mother's hand was ice in mine. I could feel the tremor in her fingers, the way she squeezed once, like an apology, before trying to pull away. "Mom," I said quietly. "We walk in together. Not behind him this time." She nodded, eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum, the same way she used to fix them on the kitchen tiles when my father raised his voice. I shifted my briefcase to my left hand, straightened my blazer, and felt for the familiar weight of my bar card in my pocket. Underneath the suit, the outline of my dog tags pressed against my skin, a thin, metallic reminder of the life he had never really believed in. Outside courtroom 3B, the hallway hummed with low conversation and the clack of cheap heels. A clerk rolled a cart of files past us without looking up. On the other side of the door, my father was telling a story loud enough for it to leak into the hall. "She'll probably come in with some strip mall ambulance chaser," he snorted. "You know how she is. Can't make a decision without somebody holding her hand." My mother flinched, like the words hit skin. I pushed the door open before she could shrink. There he was at defense table, exactly how I remembered him at every barbecue and church function. Leaning back, one arm slung over the chair, laughter a little too loud, shirt just a little too tight across the belly he pretended not to have. Next to him, Sabrina, 10 years younger than me and surgically polished, scrolled her phone. On his other side sat Mr. Lang, the silver-haired attorney he'd bought last time to win the quick, dirty divorce my mother hadn't understood. The sight of the three of them together felt like stepping back into the house I'd grown up in. Dad holding court, a woman accessorizing the scene, a man in a suit nearby to make his decisions feel official. Only now my mother wasn't in the kitchen. She was at my side. "Look who finally decided to show up," Dad said, grinning as we approached the plaintiff's table. "Elena, you didn't tell me you brought Jenna along for moral support." "Sweetheart, this is court, not career day." He laughed at his own joke. My mother's shoulders curled inward. "Paul, please." "It's fine," I said. My voice came out steady, the way it did when I read charges on a battlefield or in a brig. "Good morning." He eyed my suit, the neat file tabs, the way I set my briefcase down with practiced care. "So, who'd you find?" he asked, scanning the room for some imagined bottom-feeding lawyer. "Those TV guys with the jingles? Call now, we'll fight for you?" He chuckled. "You know judges hate that, right? Should have asked me. I know good counsel." "You do?" I asked lightly. "That's interesting." The court reporter slid into place. The clerk called, "All rise," and the room shuffled to attention as Judge Reynolds walked in. He was older than the last time I'd been here as a teenager, sitting in the gallery while my parents filed paperwork I didn't understand. Same heavy eyebrows, same way of taking in every corner of the room at once. We sat when he did. The clerk began roll. "Case number 14D972 Morales Vats Morales, post-decree motion to reopen based on alleged non-disclosure and fraud." Papers rustled. "Appearances, please." Mr. Lang stood first, smooth as glass. "Good morning, Your Honor. David Lang for the respondent, Mr. Paul Morales, who is present." My father lifted 2 fingers in a lazy half-wave toward the bench. Judge Reynolds looked to our table. "And for the plaintiff?" I rose. For a heartbeat, it felt like stepping off the ramp of a Chinook into hot air. The weightless second between everything known and everything that comes next. "Good morning, Your Honor," I said. "Captain Jenna Morales, United States Army JAG Corps. Bar number." I gave the digits I'd repeated to myself in the mirror before every appearance. "I represent the plaintiff, Elena Morales, my mother." The words clicked into place like a magazine seating into a rifle. Silence slid over the room. Sabrina's gum paused mid-chew. Even the court reporter's fingers hesitated over the keys. My father laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You can't be serious," he barked. "This is a joke, right? Jenna, this isn't some campus tribunal. You don't just—" "Mr. Morales," the judge said, voice like a slammed door, "you will speak through counsel or not at all." Lang put a hand on my father's arm, murmuring something, eyes darting between me and the bench. He looked less sure of himself than he had a minute ago. Captain Morales, Judge Reynolds said, reading from the motion. You are licensed to practice in this state? Yes, Your Honor. Currently serving in the Army Judge Advocate General's Corps? Yes, Your Honor. Nidad, he studied me for a long second. And you are appearing as counsel for your mother of your own free will? Yes, Your Honor, I said. She asked for my help. I agreed. At my side, my mother's breath hitched. She'd told me at the kitchen table that she didn't want to put me in the middle. I'd explained she'd never had the power to keep me out of it. My entire childhood had been lived in the middle of his decisions. The only difference now was that we were calling it what it was. Very well, the judge said. The court accepts your appearance. Captain, proceed. The title had never sounded like that before, not shouted over rotors or muttered in a hooch. Here, in this paneled room that had once felt like a world too big for us, it sounded like a key turning in a long-stuck lock. I opened my file, the one I'd built from months of my mother's stray envelopes and my own late-night research between duty days. Bank statements, tax returns, property records, all tabbed in yellow and blue. Lang rose. Your Honor, before we get into the substance, I'd like to note that this motion is nothing more than a vindictive attempt by my client's ex-wife, guided by an inexperienced attorney, to relitigate what has already been settled. I let him talk. Let him lay out the argument I'd already anticipated 10 moves ago. My father leaned back again, regaining some of his smile now that his lawyer was speaking. He met my eyes, smirked, and mouthed, "Not ready for this." I thought of Kandahar sand in my teeth, of convoy manifests under rocket fire, of the first time I'd stood in front of a military judge with a private's freedom hanging on every word. I thought of my mother crying quietly over a sink full of dishes, saying she didn't want trouble. No, I was ready. When Lang finished, Judge Reynolds turned back to me. Captain Morales? I stepped to the lectern, papers crisp under my fingertips. Your Honor, I said, this case isn't about hurt feelings. It's about facts under oath. The microphone carried my voice cleanly to the back of the room. My mother sat very still, hands folded so tightly I could see the tendons in her knuckles from here. We will show, I continued, that in the original proceeding, the respondent failed to disclose multiple accounts, income streams, and a property transfer. We will show signatures, dates, and amounts that do not appear anywhere in the sworn financial statements he submitted to this court. I let that hang there. Lang shifted. My father's smirk thinned. And when we're done, Your Honor, I said, I believe the record will be clear that my mother did not agree to that settlement with full knowledge of the marital estate. She signed a deal based on lies. My father pushed his chair back, about to break in again. Lang shot him a look, sharp and warning. Judge Reynolds nodded slowly. Then let's see the truth, shall we? I slid the first exhibit onto the evidence cart, the paper trail of his hidden life crossing the short distance between us. As the clerk marked it, I realized the strangest thing. My hands weren't shaking anymore. For the first time in my life, my father and I were in the same room, under the same rules. And this time, I wasn't the kid in the corner watching him talk. I was the one asking the questions. The first exhibit was just paper, white, harmless, ordinary, until the projector hummed to life and my father's bank statements glowed on the wall behind him. Exhibit A, I said. Joint checking, ending balance the month before the divorce was filed. Numbers formed a neat column. Deposits from his company, my mother's paycheck, the usual auto pays. And Exhibit B, I went on, sliding the next set of copies forward, an account at Shoreline Savings in his name only. Same month, same pay period. The second statement hit the screen. The deposits were identical. My father's salary. Only this time, instead of landing in the joint account my mom thought paid the mortgage and groceries, they were rerouted into an account she'd never been told existed. Lang shifted in his seat. My father's jaw clenched. You'll note, Your Honor, I said, that this account does not appear on the financial affidavit submitted under oath. Judge Reynolds leaned in. I do. He looked over his glasses. Mr. Lang, was the existence of this account disclosed to the court during the original proceedings? Lang smoothed his tie. Your Honor, my client recalls. Yes or no? A beat of silence. No, Your Honor, he admitted. It was not. My father hissed, David, under his breath. I kept going. I had to. If I thought too long about the way my mother was staring at the screen, like she was watching the x-ray of some old injury she'd never realized was broken, I'd lose the thread. Next, I said, sliding another set of papers onto the cart, the IRA at Riverstone Financial, opened 8 months before the divorce petition. A different logo, the same name. Paul E. Morales, owner. Funding source, I said, tapping the page. Transfers from Shoreline Savings. Again, this account is absent from the sworn affidavit. This is absurd, my father blurted. I told you, that's my retirement. It's not. Mr. Morales. The judge's voice stopped him cold. You will not speak out of turn again. Is that clear? His cheeks went the color of bad meat. Yes, Your Honor, he ground out. I swallowed. My mouth tasted like old pennies and coffee. Your Honor, I said, if I may call our first witness. The judge nodded. You may. I turned. Plaintiff calls Elena Morales. My mother jumped like I'd pulled her from a dream. I'd prepped her for this, over kitchen tables and shaky phone calls. Hearing her name out loud made it real. She walked to the stand like she was walking down a long hallway in our old house, shoulders slight and careful. The bailiff swore her in. Her voice trembled on the truth, but she got the words out. Elena, I began, keeping my tone as gentle as I could in a room that had always been his arena. How long were you married to the respondent? 32 years, she said. And during those 32 years, who handled the finances? She stared at her hands. Paul did, always. Did you have access to all of the accounts? Her laugh was small and humorless. No. Did you know about the Shoreline Savings account? I gestured to the glowing screen. Or the Riverstone IRA? No. She shook her head hard. I only knew about the joint checking and the mortgage. When you signed the divorce settlement, I said, what did you believe about your financial situation? She took a shaky breath. That we were tight, but okay, that there wasn't much. He said the business was struggling, that the market was bad. I thought I was lucky to get the house at all. The house was a peeling 2-story on the edge of town with a furnace older than I was. It was also the only thing standing between her and the kind of homelessness my father liked to threaten whenever she disagreed with him. Would you have agreed to the same terms, I asked, if you'd known about the additional accounts and retirement funds? No. Her eyes flashed just once. I'd forgotten they could do that. Absolutely not. Across the room, my father looked away. Lang stepped up for Cross, tried to paint her as forgetful, emotional, not good with numbers. He asked if maybe she just hadn't paid attention, if maybe she'd signed things without reading. She absorbed it like rain, shrinking, then straightening. I trusted my husband, she said quietly. I thought that's what marriage was. The judge watched her for a long moment. Then he turned to me. Captain? Your Honor, we have one more category of evidence, I said. Property. I pulled a slim, blue-tabbed folder from my briefcase. This was the part I'd found by accident, the night I'd fallen asleep at the dining room table with my laptop open. Half a world of statutes and case law stacked around cold chicken. Defendant's Exhibit C, I said, deliberately using his title from the original case. I slid the file onto the cart. Quitclaim deed for a lake cabin in Summit County. Executed 6 months before the divorce. From Paul Morales to his brother, for the stated consideration of $1. The cabin photo appeared on screen. Weathered wood, pine trees, a sliver of water behind. We'd gone there twice when I was a kid. Once for a weekend that turned into a fight. Once to pack up after he sold it because we needed the money. You told Mom we lost that cabin because of bills, I said, not looking at him. That's enough. Lang half rose. Counsel is testifying. I'll rephrase, I said. Mrs. Morales, did your husband tell you what happened to the Summit County cabin? He said we had to sell it, she whispered, that we couldn't afford to keep it. Did he ever say he had transferred it to his brother instead of selling it on the market? No. Your Honor, I said, this transfer is also absent from the sworn disclosures. Combined with the undisclosed accounts, it shows a pattern. The judge steepled his fingers. Mr. Lang, he said slowly, I assume there is an explanation for why this property transfer was not included in your client's original asset list. Lang cleared his throat. Sweat darkened the collar of his expensive shirt. Your Honor, my client believed the property had no equity. It was a cabin on a lake, I said. It appraised at $210,000 the year before the transfer. There was no mortgage. The judge's gaze snapped back to me. You have that appraisal, Captain? Yes, Your Honor. I slid another sheet onto the cart. The room was quiet enough to hear the soft whir of the projector fan. Judge Reynolds took off his glasses, wiped them with a cloth, and put them back on. When he spoke, his voice carried all the steel I remembered from my teenage visits here, when he'd glared at kids my age like he could see their whole future laid out. Mr. Morales, he said, please stand. My father huffed, but he stood. When you filed your sworn financial affidavit in this court, the judge said, you affirmed that it was true and complete under penalty of perjury. Do you recall that? Yes, Your Honor, my father muttered. At any point, the judge continued, did you inform opposing counsel, your own counsel, or this court of the existence of the Shoreline Savings Account, the Riverstone IRA, or the Summit County Cabin Transfer? My father's eyes flickered to Lang, then to me, then away. I didn't think I had to, he said. They were mine. The judge's expression didn't change. That was not the question. No, Your Honor, he forced out. I did not. And you signed those documents anyway. Yes, Judge Reynolds sat back. The court, he said carefully, takes a very dim view of deception in sworn materials, particularly when the deception appears calculated and sustained over time. Lang started to speak. The judge lifted a hand. The words died in his throat. Here's what we are going to do, Judge Reynolds said. I am not prepared to rule on the motion today. We will set an evidentiary hearing. Captain Morales, you will provide copies of all exhibits you intend to rely on to opposing counsel within 10 days. Mr. Lang, you will prepare to explain to this court how such significant assets were overlooked without anyone's knowledge. He paused, then added, and Mr. Morales, you should be aware that providing false information to the court can carry consequences beyond a revised divorce decree. My father's face went slack. For the first time since I'd walked in, he looked less like a man holding court and more like a man who'd just realized the room had rules he didn't write. Until then, the judge concluded, the motion to reopen is taken under advisement. Court is in recess. He rapped the gavel once. The spell broke. Chairs scraped. Whispers rose. The court reporter started packing up. My father spun on me. I saw the movement in my peripheral vision and my body tensed automatically, a flashback of the slap at the firm table earlier. But he didn't raise his hand. Not this time. What the hell do you think you're doing? He hissed. You're going to ruin me. I met his eyes. For once, I didn't look away. No, I said. You did that yourself. Behind me, my mother touched my elbow. Her hand was still shaking, but now when I looked at her, there was something else in her face. It wasn't just fear. It was the first flicker of anger, of recognition of a woman who'd watched the curtain, pulled back on the man who'd kept her small. And as we stepped into the hallway past the stale coffee and floor polish, I realized the hearing hadn't just opened a case. It had opened a door that was never going to close the same way again. The courthouse smelled like wet wool and old coffee the morning of the evidentiary hearing. Snowmelt streaked the hallway, leaving dirty crescents on the tile. My boots squeaked once as I walked, then fell silent. Years in uniform had taught me how to move without sound. Mom sat on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, twisting the strap of her purse. She'd chosen her best blouse, the one she'd worn to my commissioning. It hung looser now. Divorce and double shifts had a way of taking fabric with them. You don't have to go back in, I said quietly. Reynolds already has enough to reopen. She shook her head. If I leave, he wins again. She meant my father. She didn't have to say his name. The door opened. Lang emerged, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and tight. My father followed, a step behind, like he didn't quite know where to put his hands without a hammer or a beer. He saw us and sneered. "This is what you're doing with your life," he said. "Dragging your own father into court?" My jaw flexed. "I didn't hide accounts," I said. "You did." He took a step closer, crowding the hallway. "You think those medals make you better than me?" Villain lines short, cutting. He always delivered. I kept my hands at my sides. They remind me I know how to stand my ground. A bailiff opened the courtroom door wider. "We're back on the record in 5, he called. Lang tugged my father's sleeve. "Inside," he hissed. "Now!" We filed back in. The evidentiary hearing felt different than the motion day. Less curiosity, more gravity. The court reporter's fingers were poised like a pianist about to start a hard piece. Judge Reynolds looked tired, but his eyes were sharper than before. "All right," he said once we were seated. "We're here on Ms. Morales' motion to reopen the dissolution decree, specifically as to property division, based on newly discovered evidence of undisclosed assets." His gaze flicked to me. "Captain, you may proceed." I stood. The khaki of my service uniform felt like armor. "Your Honor," I said, "we've already established that certain accounts and transfers were not disclosed. Today, I'd like to add context." I nodded toward the back. A woman in a dark suit stood, briefcase in hand. Short hair, glasses, expression like she'd seen every trick in the book twice. "Plaintiff calls Ms. Harper Chen," I said. "Forensic accountant." My father shifted. He didn't like words he didn't control. Harper took the stand, was sworn in, and then began the slow process of gutting his story with spreadsheets and timelines. She explained how she'd traced deposits from his company into the Shoreline account, then into Riverstone, then into a third account I hadn't even known about until last week. How the pattern started 18 months before he filed for divorce. How transfers always seemed to spike right after he and Mom had a big expense. Braces, a new roof, my plane ticket home for my first deployment. "Based on your review," I asked, "approximately how much money was moved out of reach of the marital estate before the divorce?" She glanced at her notes. "Roughly $230,000, not including the cabin transfer." My mother made a small sound behind me. I didn't turn. If I looked at her, I might say something I wasn't allowed to say in this room. "And in your professional opinion," I continued, "would it have been possible for the respondent to forget about these accounts when completing his financial affidavit?" "No," she said simply. Lang did his best on cross. He asked about margin of error, memory lapses, the stress of divorce. Harper stayed unshaken. "I see people make mistakes," she said. "This isn't that. This is deliberate structuring over time to move assets off the marital balance sheet." The words hung like smoke. When she stepped down, the judge scribbled something, then looked up. "Mr. Lang," he said, "would your client like to testify as to his intent?" Lang hesitated. "Your Honor, in light of the potential criminal exposure, so that's a no," the judge said. "Very well." My father glared at me. If looks could bruise, I'd have walked out black and blue. I called one more witness. Mrs. Torres, our old neighbor. She hobbled up, leaning on her cane like a staff. She testified about late-night arguments bleeding through the walls, about the night my father shouted that he'd make sure Elena walked away with nothing but the dishes, about the morning she'd seen him loading boxes labeled files into his truck at 5 a.m., months before he told Mom he wanted out. "Did you see those boxes again?" I asked. "No," she said. "But he came back later with beer. Looked pleased with himself." A chuckle rippled through the gallery, quickly smothered. Lang tried to impeach her memory. She straightened, eyes sharp. "I'm old, not stupid," she snapped. "I remember what I heard." The judge cracked the ghost of a smile. "Noted, Mrs. Torres. Thank you." By midday, the air in the courtroom felt heavy, crowded with numbers, and years of rot finally pushed into the light. Judge Reynolds stacked the exhibits into a neat, accusing pile. "Counsel," he said, looking at Lang, "do you have any additional evidence to offer to counter the pattern we've seen today?" Lang's shoulders sagged. "No, Your Honor." "Very well." The judge took off his glasses again, wiped them slowly. That move was never good news for the person on the wrong side of his ledger. This court, he said, finds that the respondent engaged in a sustained, intentional effort to conceal significant marital assets in anticipation of divorce. Those omissions rendered the original property settlement fundamentally unfair. My mother gripped the back of the bench so hard her knuckles whitened. As such, he continued, the motion to reopen is granted. The property division is vacated and will be recalculated as if the concealed assets had been properly disclosed. Lang slumped. My father went rigid. In addition, Judge Reynolds said, voice cooling further, I am referring this matter to the county prosecutor's office for review of potential perjury and fraud on the court. My father's mouth opened. No sound came out. And Mr. Morales, the judge added, looking directly at him, you should understand that had you come clean at the outset, we would be having a very different conversation today. This court will not be used as a tool for your deception. He turned to me. Captain Morales, the law does not care that you wear a uniform. But I will say, as an aside, that the discipline you clearly brought to this evidence gathering has been helpful. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Thank you, Your Honor. He banged the gavel. We'll reconvene in 30 days with proposed new distributions. Court is adjourned. This time, when the chairs scraped back and people surged for the aisle, my father didn't rush to confront me. He sat down. Hard. For a second, he looked like a man who'd just watched the ocean eat the sandcastle he'd spent 3 decades building. Mom, I said softly, turning to her. You okay? She blinked, like she was waking from a long sleep. He lied about everything, she whispered. All those years, and he lied about everything. I wanted to hug her. Instead, I rested my hand on her forearm. He lied about the money, I said. He didn't lie about you. She frowned. What do you mean? He picked you, I said. Once. A long time ago. You built a life. You raised us. You did the work. The money doesn't change that. Her eyes filled. How are you so calm? I exhaled. Because this feels like a mission. Missions are simple. You gather intel, you make a plan, you execute. And when it's family? She asked. My throat tightened. Then you breathe, I said. And remember, you're not that scared 7-year-old anymore. Behind us, my father stood. He shuffled down the aisle like a much older man. At the door, he hesitated, then looked back at us. Our eyes met. For once, there was no command in his face, no smirk. Just something I'd never seen there before. Fear. And under it, maybe, the first flicker of understanding that the rules really did apply to him, too. He opened his mouth as if to speak. Don't, Mom said quietly. He closed it. He walked out. The door shut behind him with a soft, final click. Outside, the hallway hummed with ordinary life, traffic tickets, custody battles, people arguing about parking and fences. It almost made what we'd just done feel small. It wasn't. As we stepped into the cold air, snow stinging my cheeks, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. County area code. State seal icon. I stared at it, thumb hovering. Are you going to answer? Mom asked. I slid my thumb across the screen. Captain Morales? A man's voice said. This is Assistant District Attorney Keene. Judge Reynolds just sent over a referral. I think we should talk about your father's affidavit. The wind knifed under my collar. I straightened instinctively. Yes, sir, I said. I'll make time. Because the divorce case was only one front. And the fight we'd just started was about to move somewhere my father wanted even less. Into a room where the state, not his daughter, would be the one asking the questions. The ADA's office smelled like toner and burnt coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a little too bright for the hour. Assistant District Attorney Keene was younger than I expected. Late 30s, brown hair cut close, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow. His tie was already loosened like the day had gotten away from him twice. He closed the file in front of him and rested both hands on it. Captain Morales, he said. I appreciate you coming in. I appreciate the invitation, I answered. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Mom sat beside me, hands folded in her lap. She'd insisted on coming, even when I suggested she didn't have to. Keen flipped the file open again. A photo of my father's financial affidavit stared up at us, black ink over lies. This is simple on paper, complicated in reality, he said. We have a sworn statement. We have clear evidence it wasn't true. Perjury, Mom whispered. He nodded. Potentially. Also fraud on the court, depending on how far we go. I cleared my throat. What do you need from us? Context, he said. And your tolerance. I raised an eyebrow. Tolerance for what? For watching your father get processed like anybody else. The room went quiet. Keen tapped the file. Judge Reynolds sent this with a note. Pattern seems deliberate. Family victim appears composed and cooperative. He also mentioned your service. I didn't answer. That word, victim, sat badly in my chest. We don't charge because people are angry, Keen went on. We charge when it protects the integrity of the system and deters the next person. And you think my father is the next person? I asked. He gave me a tired half smile. Your father is the one who thought he was above the rules. He slid over another document. Callahan's forensic summary. I recognized Harper's name. We're not talking about forgetting a savings bond, Keen said, was it not? We're talking about hiding assets while signing sworn forms. If I let this go, I might as well throw the perjury statute in the trash. Mom swallowed. What happens to him? If we file, Keen said, he gets arraigned. He gets a lawyer. He might negotiate a plea, probation, restitution, maybe fines. Worst case, if he fights and loses, he could do time. It depends on the judge, the record, and whether he tries to keep lying. He looked at me directly. You'd be a key witness. Are you prepared for that? My palms were damp against my skirt. I flexed my fingers, feeling the roughness of old calluses from line handling. I've testified before, I said. Different room, different uniform, same idea. He nodded once. Then here's my proposal. I file charges. You cooperate. I make it clear we're open to a plea that emphasizes restitution and accountability over prison, assuming he takes responsibility. And if he doesn't? Mom asked. Keen's jaw tightened. Then he rolls the dice with the jury. The fluorescent lights hummed louder in the silence. Mom looked at me. I don't want you to feel like you're doing this to him. I'm not, I said. He did it to himself. I turned back to Keen. File it, I said. If the law doesn't apply to him, what's the point of any of this? Something like respect passed through his eyes. All right, Captain. We'll be in touch. We walked out into the crisp evening. The sky was the color of steel, all edges and no warmth. Mom blew out a breath that puffed in the cold. I feel sick, she said. I know, I answered. Do you? She said softly. You look calm. I'm angry, I said. Calm is what I learned to be when I'm angry. Her lips quirked. Navy training. Mostly abuela training, I said. The Navy just gave it a rank. She actually laughed at that, a small, surprised sound. It made my chest ache in a different way. We were halfway to the car when a familiar truck swung into the lot too fast, gravel crunching under the tires. Dad's truck. He parked crooked across two spots, killed the engine, and climbed out. His face was flushed, eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept, or had been drinking. How dare you! He shouted across the lot. His voice bounced off the courthouse wall. A deputy on the steps turned his head. I lifted a hand in a small, controlled wave. Inside voice, I called back. Or you're going to have an audience. He stomped toward us, boots grinding salt and sand. You went to the DA? He snarled at me. You trying to put me in jail? Good evening, I said. We just had a nice talk about your affidavit. Don't be cute, he snapped. You think strangers care about you? I'm your father. You're the man who lied under oath, I said. That's what they care about. His gaze flicked to Mom. You're letting her do this? Mom's shoulders straightened. She's not doing anything, she said. You did this. We're just done pretending. He stared at her like she'd spoken another language. You'd really throw away 40 years for some paperwork? He demanded. There it was. The word he thought made everything smaller. I stepped closer, close enough to smell coffee and stale beer on his breath. You forgot something, I said quietly. Paperwork is how our system keeps its promises. You lied to the paper, you lied to the court, you lied to us. He scoffed. It was just money. Money we needed, Mom said. Her voice was shaking, but she didn't back up. Money for braces, for college, for life. You had everything you needed, he snapped. Roof, food, what more? Respect, I said. Honesty, those would have been nice. A police cruiser rolled slowly into the lot, eyes curious. Dad noticed it. His volume dropped half a notch. You really want me locked up? He hissed. You want your father in handcuffs? I thought of all the nights he'd slammed doors, of the look on Mom's face when she thought no one was watching, of my own years of making myself small so he wouldn't take my light as a personal insult. I want you accountable, Schmas, I said. If that looks like handcuffs, that's your choice. He stared at me for a long time. The wind cut between us. You always thought you were better than this family, he said finally. No, I replied. I thought this family could be better than this. His mouth twisted. For a second, I saw something like doubt flicker in his eyes. Then he got back in his truck and slammed the door so hard the frame shuddered. Gravel spit under his tires as he peeled out of the lot. Mom exhaled shakily. I've never heard you talk to him like that, she said. I've never been in this uniform with him in a courthouse parking lot, I answered. We drove home in near silence. The heater hummed, the smell of dust and old upholstery filled the car. The next weeks moved in slow, lurching gears. Keene filed the complaint. Dad was arraigned. No cuffs, just a suit that didn't quite fit and a face set like concrete. He pled not guilty, of course. The local paper ran a tiny piece about alleged financial misrepresentation in divorce proceedings. His name, Mom's name, mine, as adult daughter and Navy officer who brought the evidence. The phone rang off the hook. Cousins, old neighbors, people who'd eaten at our table for years. Some asked how we could do this to him. Some asked why it took us so long. I learned to say the same line over and over. We're cooperating with the legal process. I can't discuss details. At work, my commanding officer called me in. The base office smelled like overbrewed coffee and printer ink, same as any command building. I read the report, he said. You okay? Yes, sir. You under any pressure that would affect your performance? No, sir. He studied me. Your father's behavior does not reflect on you, he said. You know that. I do, I said. Sir. Good, he replied. And for what it's worth, the way you handled the paper trail, JAG said it was cleaner than half the cases they see. That caught me off guard. Thank you, sir. Get back to work, Morales, he said, but his smile was soft. And tell your mom the base family services office is there for her too. At home, I spent evenings with Mom sorting through 30 years of files in 3 battered banker's boxes. Bank statements, old tax returns, yellowing receipts for things like roof, 1998, and school supplies. Underneath a stack of ancient utility bills, we found an envelope in Abuela's careful handwriting. For Elena, if she ever needs to remember. My chest tightened. I slid my finger under the flap. Inside was a letter, written in Spanish. Abuela's script slanted right, ink faded but legible. Mi niña, if you are reading this, it means something has broken that should not have. Maybe money, maybe promises, maybe both. Remember, your father is not just what he did wrong. But you are not only his daughter either. You are your own person. You are my granddaughter. You are the one who stayed when things were hard. If you must choose between peace and truth, choose truth. Real peace will come after. Love, Abuela. The paper smelled faintly of old dust and lavender, the scent she used to pin in her hair. Mom leaned over my shoulder. Tears slipped down her face. She always saw you, she whispered. She saw you too, I said. She just knew who was going to be the one standing in a courthouse someday. Mom laughed wetly. I wish she were here. She kind of is, I said, folding the letter carefully. In the paperwork. Abuela's words settled inside me like a stone in a river. Solid, unmoving, redirecting the current around it. 2 days later, Keen called. Your father wants a meeting, he said. Pre-plea, with you and your mother present, if you're willing. A meeting? I asked. What for? He's realized juries aren't kind to men who hide money from ex-wives, Keen said dryly. And I think, beneath the bluster, he doesn't want to risk prison at his age. Mom listened on speaker, twisting that same purse strap. What does he want from us? She asked. Probably mercy, Keen said. Probably someone to say they'd accept restitution and probation instead of a trial. He paused. I don't need your permission to offer a deal, but I'd like your input. I thought of my father in cuffs. I thought of Mom in that cramped pew, watching a judge recalculate her life. I thought of Abuela's letter. Set the meeting, I said. We'll decide when we hear him. When the day came, we met in a conference room in the DA's office. The air was dry and stale. A clock ticked too loudly on the wall. Dad sat at the far end of the table, no lawyer this time. Just him, a styrofoam cup of coffee, and hands folded so tightly his knuckles went white. Keen sat between us, a buffer of state authority. Mr. Morales, he said, you wanted to speak to your family. Dad looked older than I'd ever seen. The lines around his mouth had deepened. Gray hair stood out against the worn collar of his shirt. I didn't think you'd come, he said, eyes flicking from me to Mom. We came to listen, I said. Not to fix. He flinched at the word, maybe because fixing had always been Mom's job, mine too after I came back in uniform. He took a breath. I lied, he said. The words came out flat, like he'd had to pry them loose. I moved the money. I hid it. I told myself it was mine because I earned it. I told myself your mother would just waste it. I told myself... He trailed off. You told yourself you were smarter than the court, Keen said mildly. Dad gave a small, sour smile. Guess I wasn't. He rubbed a hand over his face. I was angry, he said. You both know that. I felt like everything I built was getting taken. I didn't know who I was without the house, the business, the image. He glanced at Mom. I told myself she didn't appreciate it. Mom's voice was quiet. I appreciated you coming home at night, she said. I just wanted to stop being afraid of your moods. He looked like she'd slapped him. And you, he said, turning to me. You left. You put on that uniform and you became something else. Something I don't understand. You didn't have to understand it, I said. You just had to respect it. He swallowed. I didn't know how to be proud without feeling small. Silence settled over the table. That's not an excuse, he added after a moment. I'm just telling you the truth. I studied him. The man across from me looked less like the looming figure from my childhood and more like some tired guy who'd finally realized his bluff had been called. What do you want? I asked. He laughed bitterly. Less than I used to, he said. Keen says, if I plead to reduce charges, pay restitution, go to financial counseling, they'll recommend probation. No jail. My lawyer says it's the best I'm going to get. He met my eyes. I won't ask you to lie for me, he said. I know I don't deserve that. I'd like to know if you'd be okay with that deal, or if you'd rather watch me go on the news in cuffs. I thought about it longer than he probably expected. The little girl in me wanted the cuffs. The teenage me, too. The woman in uniform thought about resources, about the prosecutor's caseload, about other victims, about the lesson already written in public record. I want you on a leash, not in a martyr pose, I said finally. If probation and restitution keep you under supervision and make you pay back what you took, I'm okay with that. As long as you stop pretending you're the victim. He let out a breath he'd been holding. Mom nodded slowly. I don't need you in prison, she said. I need you honest. Maybe for the first time in your life. Keene wrote something down. I'll make the offer, he said. Judge will have final say. Dad wiped at his eyes quickly like he hoped no one would notice. Thank you, he murmured. Don't thank us yet, I said. This doesn't erase anything. It just stops it from getting worse. He nodded. I know. He stood, paused, then looked at me. You did good, he said quietly. With the case, with all of it, it landed somewhere between compliment and confession. For once, there was no sarcasm wrapped around the words. Paperwork, I said, picking up Abuela's letter from my folder and tapping it lightly. You should try respecting it sometime. A faint, broken smile tugged at his mouth. I'm learning, he said. We left him there with Keene and the forms. Outside, the winter air hit harder. My breath fogged in front of me. Mom slipped her arm through mine. What now? She asked. We wait for the judge, I said. Then we redraw the map. And you? She asked. What do you do now? I looked up at the courthouse, at the flag snapping in the wind above it, at the people going in and out, scared, angry, hopeful, resigned. I go back to work, I said. And then someday I host a dinner where no one gets slapped and no one hides anything. Mom chuckled. Ambitious. Abuela would approve, I said. She squeezed my arm. She'd probably bring the paperwork, she said. Exactly, I replied. Because the real mission wasn't just about reopening a divorce. It was about rewriting the rules of how our family dealt with truth. And deciding that from now on, in our house, the person who told it would finally be the one who got to stay. Spring crept in so slowly we almost missed it. One day the courthouse steps were ossy and slick. The next time I walked up them, there were pansies and chipped concrete planters, and somebody had finally scraped the last of the winter salt off the railings. Dad's plea hearing was short. No handcuffs, no dramatic gavel slam, just Judge Reynolds in the same black robe, his voice as flat as ever. Mr. Morales, he said, you are pleading guilty to reduced charges of making a false statement under oath and attempted fraud upon the court. You will pay restitution as outlined, complete financial counseling, and remain under supervised probation. You will not handle funds in excess of a set amount without approval. You will not open new lines of credit without disclosure. Dad's "Yes, Your Honor" sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. When it was over, reporters didn't storm the hallway. There was no scandal on the evening news, just a paragraph in the local paper, buried between a high school football story and an article about a new grocery store. Sometimes, justice looks like headlines. Sometimes it looks like fine print. At Mom's apartment, life settled into a new kind of quiet. She picked up more hours at the clinic and stopped flinching when the phone rang. Bills went to a P.O. box she controlled. We sat at her little kitchen table with a fresh binder, labeling tabs. Rent, utilities, savings, my ski. Look at us, she said, sliding a color-coded folder into place. Two grown women, excited about envelopes. Abuela would be proud, I said. She'd say we're late to the party, Mom replied. But she was smiling. Dad called once a week at first, then every other week. Probation required check-ins and classes. Our house required something he'd never practiced much. Humility. Sometimes Mom answered, sometimes she didn't. He asked to meet me one Saturday at the park. He was early. That surprised me more than anything. He sat on the same bench we'd used months before, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, eyes on the duck pond. I'm not allowed to open a new checking account without a counselor signing off, he said by way of greeting. You happy now? I'm okay with the system seeing what you do with money, I said. Yes. He huffed out a dry, almost laugh. Honest, he said. Weird being on the wrong end of that, isn't it? I've seen a lot of people on the wrong end of forms, I said. You're the first one I'm related to, he grimaced. Lucky me. We sat in silence for a minute. Kids squealed somewhere near the swings. A dog barked. I'm in a group, he said finally, for people who screwed up finances. It's mostly guys who gambled away their houses. I told them I lied in court instead. How'd that go over? I asked. They stared at me, he said. Then one guy said, "At least you stopped." He glanced at me. I walked out thinking, maybe I did. Just 15 years later than I should have. I studied his face. There were more lines around his eyes now, less swagger. You could have stopped the first time you shifted money, I said. I know, he said. Or the second. Or the 10th. He paused. You were right, you know, he said. About the paperwork, about respect. I didn't rush to fill the space. That was old training, too. He cleared his throat. I don't expect you to forget, he said, or to trust me with anything permanent again. I wanted you to know I heard you. In the parking lot, in court. He swallowed, Adam's apple bobbing. I'm proud of you, he said quietly. Not for this, he gestured vaguely, for everything. Navy, the way you handled this mess. The way you protect your mother. He shook his head. I spent so long trying to be the big man in the house, I didn't notice my daughter had become the real adult. The words sat between us, raw and awkward. Thank you, I said. It was all I could manage. He nodded like he'd been braced for a different answer. I'm still mad, I added. Yeah, he said. You should be. But I'm less tired, I said. Now that the lying's not on our side anymore. He stared at the pond. Me too, he admitted. Turns out carrying around secrets weighs more than probation paperwork. We met like that once a month. No big reconciliation speech. No movie-style hug in the rain. Just two people on a bench trying to learn a new language where honesty didn't blow everything up. At Mom's insistence, he started coming by her apartment on Sundays. For coffee, not control. He'd knock, wait to be invited in, take the seat she offered, not the one at the head of the table he used to assume was his. The first time he tried to complain about the judge, Mom slid the restitution schedule across the table and said, You signed it. He shut his mouth. Small miracles. At work, one of the younger sailors in my division knocked on my office door one afternoon. Ma'am, she said, can I ask you something not exactly Navy? I gestured to the chair. Close the door behind you. She sat, fiddling with the edge of her cover. My parents are divorcing, she blurted. My mom keeps saying she's fine, but I think my dad's hiding money, and she just signs whatever he puts in front of her because she hates conflict. I felt something twist under my ribs. A too familiar story. Who's her lawyer? I asked. She bit her lip. Some guy from church. Very friendly, not very thorough. I grabbed a sticky note. Okay, I said. First rule, your mom doesn't sign anything she doesn't understand. Second, get copies of whatever she does sign. Third, I wrote down 2 names, civilian attorneys who'd helped military families before, and the number for legal assistance on base. Tell her to get a second opinion, I said, quietly. If Dad has nothing to hide, nothing changes. If he does, this gives her options. The sailor blinked back sudden tears. How do you know all that? She asked. I looked at the abuela letter folded in the corner of my desk, tucked behind a photo of Mom and me at the bay. I learned the hard way, I said. You don't have to. She stood, shoulders a little straighter. Thank you, ma'am, she said. After she left, I stared at the Navy emblem on my wall. The anchor, the eagle, the ship. We talk a lot about ships and seas and unseen battles. We don't talk enough about courtrooms and binders and the battles that happen under fluorescent lights. Months slid by, seasons turned. Mom's laugh came easier. Dad's temper cooled quicker. I deployed again and came home again, to a world that felt a little more honest each time. On the anniversary of the first hearing, we had dinner at Mom's. Not an occasion, just a Tuesday with roasted chicken and rice and the old radio humming boleros in the background. Dad knocked exactly at 6. He brought a store-bought flan and a handwritten note listing the restitution he'd paid so far. No more secrets, he said, placing it on the counter. Mom nodded. Good, she said. We like receipts now. We ate, we talked, we argued lightly about nothing important. At one point, Dad raised his glass of water. To Elena, he said gruffly, for making sure the government takes my money before I can do something stupid with it. Mom snorted. I rolled my eyes. I'll add it to my evaluation, I said. Special skill set, keeping Dad out of jail. He smiled. Small, but real. After he left, Mom stood at the sink, hands in soapy water. You know, she said, if you hadn't brought those papers, I'd probably still be sitting in that house thinking I was crazy for wondering where it all went. I leaned against the counter. If you hadn't believed me when I said we could do this differently, I answered, I'd still be sending money home and hoping you were okay. She dried her hands and turned to me. You were brave, she said. Not just in uniform. Here. I was tired, I said. The bravery sort of snuck in behind that. She laughed softly. Whatever you call it, she said. I'm glad you did it. Your abuela would be proud. I thought of that letter again, of the line that hooked itself into my spine. If you must choose between peace and truth, choose truth. Real peace will come after. She'd been right. Paper hadn't fixed everything. It hadn't erased years of hurt. It hadn't turned my father into a different person overnight. But it had drawn a line no one in our family had ever drawn before. It had told the court and our community and ourselves that what happens inside a house still has to match the story we tell outside of it. That night, back in my own small apartment, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh, empty notebook. On the first page, I wrote in dark blue ink, paper beats promises when promises lie. But the real win is when the paper finally matches the life you're building. Then I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and let myself sleep in a world where, for the first time, the truth had a seat at our table, and I didn't have to shrink to make room for it. A month later, I stood in a windowless briefing room on base with a dry erase marker in my hand instead of a rifle. The projector hummed. 20 sailors and Marines shifted in plastic chairs, some with crossed arms, some taking notes like their lives depended on it. In a way, they did. On the slide behind me, money, family, and your name on the line. What they don't teach you at boot. Okay, I said, tapping the screen. Scenario 3, your favorite uncle wants you to co-sign a loan. What's your first move? A couple of them groaned. One kid in the back muttered, change my name and move to Greenland. Not bad, I said. But seriously, first move? A young Marine with a high and tight raised his hand. Ma'am, I'll think about it and go talk to legal. There it is, I said. You do not sign anything you don't understand. You do not assume blood equals safety. You get advice from people who don't benefit if you stay confused. They scribbled that down. I flipped to the next slide. A mock-up of a call log, redacted names, a fake will. Everything I'm teaching you, I said, I did wrong the first time. I trusted words over documents. I trusted we're family over receipts. A few heads lifted. I'm not telling you to stop loving your people, but I said, I'm telling you to love yourself enough to protect your future when they forget how. On the break, one of the chiefs wandered up with his coffee. Ma'am, he said quietly, that this come from something you went through? I thought of Abuela's letter, the stamp, the ink, the slap in the lawyer's conference room, the pale face of the judge when he saw the numbers, my father's shoulders on that park bench. Yeah, I said. It did. He nodded. You ever think about being a JAG? I smiled. No, I like my side of the house. But I do like watching soldiers and sailors walk out of this room a little harder to cheat. He snorted. Amen to that. That night, back in my apartment, I opened the top drawer of my desk. Abuela's letter was still there, folded at the same crease, paper soft from how many times I'd unfolded it. I read that line again, lips moving. If you must choose between peace and truth, choose truth. Real peace will come after. I put the letter back, then pulled out my own notebook. The one with that sentence I'd written on the first page. I added a second line under it. Paper beats promises, but character decides what you do with both. I capped the pen and stared at those words. My father wasn't suddenly a saint. My mother wasn't suddenly fearless. Our house, our family, our story, they were all still works in progress, with days that slid backward as often as they pushed forward. But the difference now was simple and enormous. The lies weren't in charge anymore. The paperwork matched the truth. And the girl who used to swallow her questions had become the woman who asked them out loud in courtrooms and classrooms and kitchen tables until the answers lined up with the life she was building. That was my real inheritance, not the accounts, not the house, not even the letter. The real inheritance was the spine I'd grown, the boundaries I'd learned to draw, and the quiet knowledge that I could love people and still say no when they crossed a line. It turns out you can come from a family that breaks things and still decide you're going to be the one who fixes them, without letting them break you anymore. And once you've seen that, you never look at a signature, a promise, or silence the same way again. A month later, I stood in a windowless briefing room on base with a dry erase marker in my hand instead of a rifle. The projector hummed. 20 sailors and Marines shifted in plastic chairs, some with crossed arms, some taking notes like their lives depended on it. In a way, they did. On the slide behind me, money, family, and your name on the line, what they don't teach you at boot. Okay, I said, tapping the screen. Scenario 3. Your favorite uncle wants you to co-sign a loan. What's your first move? A couple of them groaned. One kid in the back muttered, change my name and move to Greenland. Not bad, I said. But seriously, first move? A young Marine with a high and tight raised his hand. Ma'am, I say I'll think about it and go talk to legal. There it is, I said. You do not sign anything you don't understand. You do not assume blood equals safety. You get advice from people who don't benefit if you stay confused. They scribbled that down. I flipped to the next slide. A mock-up of a call log, redacted names, a fake will. Everything I'm teaching you, I said. I did wrong the first time. I trusted words over documents. I trusted we're family over receipts. A few heads lifted. I'm not telling you to stop loving your people, I said. I'm telling you to love yourself enough to protect your future when they forget how. On the break, one of the chiefs wandered up with his coffee. Ma'am, he said quietly, this come from something you went through? I thought of Abuela's letter, the stamp, the ink, the slap in the lawyer's conference room, the pale face of the judge when he saw the numbers, my father's shoulders on that park bench. Yeah, I said. It did. He nodded. You ever think about being a JAG? I smiled. No, I like my side of the house, but I do like watching soldiers and sailors walk out of this room a little harder to cheat. He snorted. Amen to that. That night, back in my apartment, I opened the top drawer of my desk. Abuela's letter was still there, folded at the same crease, paper soft from how many times I'd unfolded it. I read that line again, lips moving. If you must choose between peace and truth, choose truth. Real peace will come after. I put the letter back, then pulled out my own notebook, the one with that sentence I'd written on the first page. I added a second line under it. Paper beats promises, but character decides what you do with both. I capped the pen and stared at those words. My father wasn't suddenly a saint. My mother wasn't suddenly fearless. Our house, our family, our story, they were all still works in progress, with days that slid backward as often as they pushed forward. But the difference now was simple and enormous. The lies weren't in charge anymore. The paperwork matched the truth. And the girl who used to swallow her questions had become the woman who asked them out loud in courtrooms and classrooms and kitchen tables until the answers lined up with the life she was building. That was my real inheritance, not the accounts, not the house, not even the letter. The real inheritance was the spine I'd grown, the boundaries I'd learned to draw, and the quiet knowledge that I could love people and still say no when they crossed a line. It turns out you can come from a family that breaks things and still decide you're going to be the one who fixes them without letting them break you anymore. And once you've seen that, you never look at a signature, a promise, or a silence the same way again. If your family ever mistook your silence for weakness, follow Honor Life for stories of women in uniform who let preparedness, not volume, decide what's fair.